Great.
Well, Keith, how are you doing today? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Mark. Good to see you again. Delighted to be here.
Yep, same here. I'm so excited to talk to you. I've been waiting to talk to you for such a long time. You have a new book coming out, 10x Superpower, and you were generous enough to send me an excerpt of the book. And boy, did it blow my mind. How did you come up with the idea for this book?
It's a work of many years, let's put it that way. It was a succession from previous books until I got to this thing, and then the little light bulb went off my head, and I said, wait a minute, that's what's missing from all this. Framing it in this way that we can create the possible from the impossible if we understand what that process is. We've done it our whole lives, and each of us has several examples of that. And once you get your brain around that frame, then literally anything's possible.
Your previous book was primarily about goal setting, helping to get to a certain type of goal, whether it be personal or professional. Can you tell a little bit about that and then how that segued into this book?
Yes, and there are actually two previous books. You and I talked about one previously, Magic Lamp is what it's called. And it was very successful, came out a number of years ago. It was translated into a bunch of languages. It's one of those books where I go into a crowd and introduce myself or introduced or whatever, and people said, oh, I read that book when I was in graduate school, or I read that book when I was in college. And one, that makes you feel old, but two, it makes you feel useful, right? Like somebody's getting something out of it. So it's still selling. I tried to get the rights back to this book because it's been 20 plus years, and the publisher said, oh no, you can't have it back. We're selling too many of them. It's like, okay, that's good for both of us. But so what I started feeling after I'd been deploying this methodology of making my wishes come true through what's called the LAMP process, and we can get to that in a second, something was missing. I was doing exactly what I set out to do. I was accomplishing goals, one goal after the next, always making incremental progress. And I wanted to make greater progress. I wanted to go exponential. And I started thinking about that. I couldn't figure it out. I dove back into all my resources like you. I'm a self-help, self-improvement junkie. Spent my life trying to figure out, how do I tap my human potential and how do I help other people tap theirs? That's my life's work, and it fascinates me. So I did a bunch of new research, contacted a bunch of new people, and then came up with something called Magic Questions. And Magic Questions was the missing piece for me in terms of success. Magic Questions are the foundation of everybody's system of personal improvement, but they don't call it that. From Socrates to Tony Robbins to Earl Nightingale to Dale Carnegie, it's all about Magic Questions, but they don't call it that. And I started thinking about it, came up with this process for Magic Questions, brought out this book that was successful. And I said, there's still something missing. What is it? And then it all came together, the LAMP, the Magic Questions, and then this idea of 10x Superpower. And it's that we think there's a thing called impossibility. And it's really not about the physical universe. You can't be in two places at one time, that kind of thing. It's not about that at all. It's about the limitations in our own brain. And if we start thinking of the impossible as a resource instead of as a barrier, then our lives change on the spot. It's terrific what happens in an instant once you get that.
What does that mean, thinking of impossibility as a resource as opposed to an obstacle?
Okay, as an obstacle, you think of something and you think, I can't do that. You're done, you go on to the next thing, right? You go back to, okay, I can't take my business and grow it by a factor of 10. That's impossible. So I'm going to add 20% this year, which is a heavy lift. And then you say, so I'll just do more of what I'm doing and just try to do it better and hopefully improve myself this year, and I'll do the same thing next year. Eventually you run out of time. How many hours are there in the day? How many times can you increment your commitment to your business? And a lot of entrepreneurs, which is my target audience, if you will, a lot of entrepreneurs get wrapped up in that thing. They have this business they love, but they're working harder than they've ever had in their lives, and they don't know how to get out of that loop. What impossibility thinking does, or the impossibility effect, is you start thinking about what is impossible, and you say, okay, first off, what if it were possible? That changes something in your brain, right? You give yourself permission to imagine it. Instead of bringing down, bam, no, absolutely impossible, you start thinking, what if it were possible? And you start thinking about it. And once you start imagining something, it becomes more real. So once you start imagining the impossible, let's say 10xing your business, it becomes real. And now you start thinking, okay, wait a minute, how can I make that happen? And one way to do that is you imagine yourself and pick a time frame. At this point, we're not worried about time frame, but let's say the impossible thing you imagine is 10 times more revenue or 10 times more profit or 10 times more customers. Put a number on it, something you can measure. Now take yourself into the future and imagine you've achieved that. Not you're going to achieve it, imagine you've achieved it. Now turn around and look back at today. and look back at how you got there. It's a wonderful exercise. It's a fun exercise. And then you start thinking about obstacles and problems and everything. You start overcoming them. This whole mental thing's going on, and you begin to realize, well, wait a minute, what if I committed to this? I know it's impossible. What if I committed to this? You do that, and you throw a switch in your brain. And your brain suddenly starts thinking, okay, I need to make this happen. Brain doesn't care about what's impossible or not. Brain just takes its orders from you. And if you say, okay, I'm committed to this. Now your brain starts essentially a progression where you begin to gain capabilities. And then you begin to understand the reason I thought this thing was impossible is because for me, for the person I was when I came up with this idea, it was impossible. I was right. I didn't have the capability. But what if I add to my capabilities? And then you go, oh, wait a minute. All bets are off at that point. You start adding to your capabilities. You start growing. That's what we're describing here, the process of growth. And then before you know it, you've added capabilities and this thing isn't impossible anymore. And then before you know that, you've achieved it. And then pretty soon, not only have you achieved it, you've become competent at it, and it's even easy. And in the book, I give several examples of that. How many times does an infant try to walk, falling down, tripping, all that stuff before it gives up? It doesn't give up. We're programmed with this instinct. We're not going to give up. You say, okay, that's a 10x leap. That's going from the impossible to the possible. But it's an infant. That doesn't really count. There aren't any other examples in our lives, right? And then you say, wait a minute. How about when I learned to talk? Okay. How about when I learned to read? Learn to write? Oh, yeah, okay, but you're a kid. None of that counts, blah, 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 blah. You're trying to figure out, no, this can't possibly be true that I've been doing this my whole life. And then you say, okay, what about when you learn to ride a bike? You go, oh. Now, I had 3 older brothers, and I watched them riding a bike, and I realized I can't do that. They're taller than me. I got training wheels. I keep falling over. It's impossible. I can't do it. But I didn't give up, and pretty soon I was riding a bike. And now I couldn't forget how to ride a bike if I wanted to. What was impossible became easy, which is the subtitle of the new book. And then it keeps going. What about when you learn to drive a car? And my favorite one, and this tends to blow people's minds when I'm face-to-face with them or in a seminar or something like this, they're trying really hard to mismatch this. They're trying really hard to think, okay, this can't be true. I can't really be capable of 10x growth, right? And then I say, okay, was there a time in your life, and I'm talking to entrepreneurs now, successful entrepreneurs, right? I say, was there a time in your life when you were making 1/10 of the income you're making now? And everybody goes, yeah, sure. I had a paper route when I was a kid. That's 1/100th or whatever. And if you think back to that moment and then you look forward to this moment, would you believe what you've got now is even possible? The answer is, of course not. You had no idea. You had no frame of reference. These are just examples of how over and over again in our lives, we have gone from the impossible to the possible, but we've never harnessed it, right? We've never put a wrapper around it and said, I can do this again and again. I can do this as often as I want. I can do this with my business. I can do this with my relationships. I can do this with my body. I'm talking to a guy who's done that. These are wonderful stories, and we all have them. We all have our own story, but we've not allowed ourselves to think of it that way. We get trapped in, oh, it's impossible, meaning the physical universe won't allow it, which is crap. It's our own crap, right? And then we turn that around, we realize, wait a minute, of course it's impossible because I can't do it right now. But what if I increase my capabilities? What if I could do it? And now it's possible.
There's so many good nuggets here that I want to talk about. But before any of that, talking to you in real life is like almost finally there's a picture to the voice in my head. Some of these things I think about all the time, and you're verbalizing and vocalizing it in ways that I never even imagined. And it's starting to connect dots. And I'm just blown away with everything you're saying. You're 100% correct. It's about visualizing that you've already achieved it and then figuring out what are the tools and the techniques and the methodologies and the processes that are needed to be able to get there. And instead of trying to build it forward, what you're talking about is the insane skill set of reverse engineering it.
Yes, yes.
The way you put it together as to asking entrepreneurs, was there a time when you made 1/10 of the money? It's a brilliant analogy because now you're demonstrating that you did 10x your money. What I can show you is how to reduce that time frame. Maybe it took you 10 years to 10x that. How could we do that in 1 year? Yep. And then all of a sudden, this impossible achievement of 10xing that sounds so magical and ludicrous and never going to happen, in an instant, just through that one analogy becomes real. So I love it. You're a great teacher. And I want to tell you that because great teachers have an ability to infer upon their student knowledge that just seems so difficult in the first place. Once they break it down, it's like, how come I didn't think of that in the first place?
I love what you just said. Thank you very much. You're very kind. But how many times, both of us and your audience, how many times have you heard something and it goes, bang? Why didn't I think of that? And that's fun, that's useful, but that's not the point. The point is now you know. Think of how many billions of people preceded you, how many billions of people you haven't met yet in the world, and they're all smart, and they're all creative, and they're all coming from their own place. And what you just described about these things that sort of prove to you that you can make these changes. Psychologists call this evidence procedures, right? And that's a buzzword, but I'm fascinated by that in our lives because one of the things you learn is it's much easier to do X. And in the case of what we're talking about, 10X, if you give yourself an example of having done it in the past. Doesn't have to be the same thing, doesn't have to be the same achievement. It's just this process of, I've done this, which means I can do it again. That's evidence from your own life. And that's a powerful lesson if you look for it, if you take value from it. And I had the same aha moments you were just describing. And it's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because I realized I keep writing these books that oh, this is so good, but there's something missing. And oh, this is really good, but there's something missing. And then I got to this, and that's what's missing. And I would love to have come up with this 20 years ago. I didn't. That's okay. I've been learning ever since.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the human psychology, because you delved into that and gave some examples as well. You're so correct. When we are kids, when we are children, when we're infants, learning how to walk, learning how to talk, learning how to drive, even as teenagers and young adults, we do the impossible through repetition and we don't give up. And what happens in your studies, in your research, in your meeting with thousands and thousands of people? What happens to us that at some point we convert into the negative naysayer who doesn't believe in the magic anymore and all of a sudden becomes way too practical? What does that happen in our mind that causes us to become this way, that we don't believe?
Yep. So that's an awesome question. I've actually been trying really hard to answer that question. Don't know that I have a great answer, but let me take a stab at it. Because the science behind this, the science isn't terribly clear. What I sense from personal experience is only about this is bad news, but I'm going to share this anyway. Only about 1 in 100 people are prepared to make this leap. 100 of them have made the leap in their lives before. But for whatever reason, only about 1 in 100 is prepared to make the leap. And I think it's because at some level, people are afraid to make such a leap. Now think about this for a second. You say, okay, how would you like to have 10 times as much income? How would you like to be 10 times as healthy? How would you like to have 10 times better relationships? And people go, yeah, this is great. And then they start thinking about it. And they say, wait a minute, what you're talking about is a completely transformed life. As you experienced in your own story, once you started doing things physiologically and mentally, everything else changed in your life. Everything. It's this profound, what I call a 10X transformation, right? You do it in one part of your life, start with business, start your health, whatever you want, and then suddenly it ripples to the rest of your life. People start doing the math on that, so to speak, and they think, where do I fit in this new life? What about my friends? What are they going to think of me if I'm suddenly worth 10 times as much and my business is 10 times as great? And there's another little piece to this too, by the way. It's not a little piece at all. If you go 10X, it's actually easier than doing what you're currently doing now. That's a piece that's really hard for people to wrap their brain around. But the short explanation of that is what got you where you are today, all the conventional wisdom, can't get you to 10X. You can't work 10 times more hours, right? You can't work 10 times harder. It's impossible. You can't do it. So you got to do something different. And it's that doing something different that I think may intimidate people. They may be afraid of it. What does it mean if I'm really doing this and learning this new skill and pushing this boundary? And then who am I at the end of this process? Now, the truth is you've transformed your capabilities hugely, but you're still the same person, but you're not in the same world, if that makes sense. And the world looks at you differently. The world looks at you differently than before you started your transformation. Looks at me differently. It's just the way it works. And I think you and I are the kind of people that we couldn't wait to make that transformation. I think a lot of people I'm a little scared of that. Not sure what that means. I think I want to stick with my incremental progress, which is fine. You want 20% growth, go for 20% growth. So I'd love the whole world to jump on this bandwagon and get everything they can out of it, but not deluding myself that everybody's going to get it or want to get it. And so I'm really trying to find people who want this so much that they realize, I know I have to change who I am to get to this thing. I'm willing to do that. I'm looking forward to doing that. Might scare the hell out of me, but I'm looking forward to doing it. There's this really fine line between fear and excitement. I'm not even certain there is a line, but I know that the way I deal with things that frighten me is I turn them into, just in my brain, I get excited about it. Damn, that's going to scare the crap. It's like a roller coaster ride, right?
Yeah.
People seek that out. People go to horror movies. Why? Because they want this thrill. Okay, do a thrill that'll transform your life. And one of the key transformations here, and again, this may unsettle some people, but it's one of the things that gets me juiced, and I think gets you juiced too, is you can also 10x the impact you have in the world. Right? With this book that I've written, or I'm in the process of finishing, it's based on these principles that I'm describing, right? By doing this 10x in my life and teaching others to do it in their lives, I've increased my impact hugely. That's the ultimate reward for me. It's great to have money and all that stuff. Prosperity is great. This is America. God bless us. There's no limit. But what really gets me up in the morning is the idea that I can positively impact my world more by doing this new stuff, this 10x stuff, than I ever could before. And I've spent a lot of years trying to do it, but it's more exciting today than it was ever before. And that's a good way to get up in the morning, I got to say.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there is so much depth and value in what you just said. And for those listeners who are wondering, what does he mean when he says that only 1 out of 100 are prepared to make this leap? Why wouldn't I want it? As someone who has gone through several transformations, recently one going from a 41% body fat to a 6% body fat, it changes your identity.
Totally.
And not a lot of people are okay with getting their identity messed with at that level.
Right.
I used to be a certain person, and I used to indulge in certain behaviors, and I used to hang out with certain people, and I used to talk about certain things. I used to believe certain things were real and not. And when you go through a 10x transformation like this, it changes all of that. And it's very scary because all of a sudden the relationship between your husband and the wife can be different. The friends can be different.
Yep.
And how people perceive you can be different. Because physically I might be looking different, but emotionally I might still need work to catch up to the physical aspect.
Yes, that's right.
So the way you put it is brilliant, which is that even though every one of us perhaps has the power to go through the 10x transformation, how many of us are actually willing to be able to do it? Yeah. It is the willingness that you are saying that matters.
Willingness and commitment.
And commitment. Yep. I love it. So many of us, let me ask you this, so many of us are paralyzed. We're talking about 10x transformation. But even when it comes to just changing little things in our life, not even a 10% goal or a 20% goal, we are so afraid of making a mistake, making the wrong choice. Tell us about that. What is the real cost behind it?
So again, these are just awesome questions. There's a very popular meme. I call it a meme. I think it came out before the term meme even existed. It's called the 80-20 rule, Pareto's principle, where 80% of how you spend your time produces 20% of your results. This is true in sales. It's true in business. It's true in all kinds of areas of human endeavor. I've done a lot of research into this, and maybe the numbers are different. Maybe it's 70-30, maybe it's 90-10, but it just seems to apply to what human beings do. We spend most of our time doing what gives us the least results. I'm sorry, go figure that one out, right? But it's true over and over again. And one of the reasons, this is what my research has led me to discover, or at least understand, let's put it that way. One of the reasons is because there is so much noise in the world. There is so much distraction that we can't figure out what's 80 and what's 20. So if 80% produces 20% of our results, you do the math and you say, wait a minute, that means that 20% of what I'm doing, 20% of how I spend my day produces 80% of my results. All you got to do to make a huge change in your life is to focus on the 20%. That's it. It's that easy. How do you figure out what the 20% are? And that's where people fall off that horse. So what I figured out is, and there are people who've been thinking about this long before I did, so I'm not taking credit for this, but what I finally figured out for myself is that this is called constraint theory. If you do a 10x goal, if you commit to a 10x goal, there are only so many ways you can get there. It's such a leap. First, you have to believe it's impossible. You have to commit to a goal that's so far out there it's impossible. If you think it's possible, you're not being ambitious enough. You're fooling yourself. Make it impossible. This is the impossibility effect you mentioned earlier. But once you make it impossible, you realize, okay, all this stuff that I can do, it's down to this. This is the only way I can get to that impossible goal. So all the rest of that stuff, which is what? It's the 80%. The noise, just from an engineering point of view, there's a thing called signal and noise. And if you're doing something in electronics or radio frequency engineering or anything like that, you try to figure out what is signal, which is of value to me, and what is noise. It's the same thing in our lives. We got so much crap going around us, so many distractions competing for our attention, that it's very hard to figure out what is signal and what is noise. You make a 10x commitment, and now suddenly this is what I have to do. This is the only way I can do it. The rest of that stuff I can just forget about. So you are automatically focused on the 20% simply because you've done what I call an impossibility filter. You've said, okay, this is impossible. Now, how do I do it? And you go, okay, if it were possible, you'd have to do this. And they're like 3 things. Okay, I'll do those 3 things, as opposed to how do I increase my world by 20%? There are like 9 million ways to do that. Now, how do you figure that out? So the first part of that is figuring it out. The second part of it is really understanding what happens when you make a mistake. If you take this 80-20 rule, and I don't mean to get into math here, but it's fun to go down this rabbit hole. If you take the 80-20 rule seriously and you say, okay, my business, I make $1,000 a day. The 80-20 rule says that 80% of my activity is going to produce 20% of my results. That's $200. Okay. So if let's say it's a 10-hour day, let's keep the math really simple. 80% of that is 8 hours. So in 8 hours, I produce $200. You can do the math on that. It's $25 an hour. Okay. Is that what you want to earn? Whatever. That's fine. The other 20% of your day, 2 hours, you're producing $800. Okay. Now I'm interested. That sounds great. And now suddenly that's $400 an hour. Right? So now you're thinking, wait a minute, this is hugely different. And most people don't understand how different the 80% and the 20% are. Now take it a step further. $25 an hour, $400 an hour. That's 16 times difference. So that's, if somebody came to you and said, Mark, I want to suggest an investment to you. Now, you've currently been doing X. I want you to do 10X, and it's going to come out 1,600% better than X. What would you say? Sign me up, yeah. But people, it's so easy to get lost in the memetics, the coolness of talking about 80-20 rule without digging down and saying, my God, this is transformational. If I actually understand this, I have to figure out a way to cut through it and find out what the 20% might be. And that's where the 10X comes in, that impossibility filter. If I commit to the impossible, I'm working on the 20% automatically.
Absolutely. Being able to sift through the noise and being laser focused on the things that truly matter, and then committing to it all the way through and taking actions all the way through. I love it. I love it. You talk about your book about the power of you and the power of who. Tell us, our audience, a little bit about why that matters and why it's so important.
So the first chapter is all about this 10X mind shift, how you start thinking 10X. And when you take that seriously and you commit to your impossible goal, sooner or later, you're going to say, okay, I'm there. How do I do this? And that's the wrong question. That's the question we've been taught to ask. That's the question we've asked most of our lives, the how question. How do I do this? The question that will really help you answer that is turning that into a who question. Who can help me do this? So a case in point, let's say I use this example in my book. When I started my business, I did everything myself. I was in the high-tech world doing all kinds of startups and stuff like this. And I said, no, I want to do my own thing. I want to do this coaching thing. And I want to do it right. So I did everything myself, because who else could do it right but me, right? That's classic entrepreneurial trap, right? And I was having fun. I was using all kinds of new tools and geeking out on technology because I came out of high-tech. I love technology. It's great. And then I realized I'm doing everything, which means I'm not doing anything. I'm not getting anything done. So I said, okay, what do I do here? Who can help me? Which was the magic word. So I started thinking about somebody who could, for example, take web development off my plate. I was doing web development. I'm not a developer, I'm not even a tech guy. I'm fascinated with technology, but I'm not a tech guy. But I was doing it because it was fun, it was cool, and somebody had to do it, right? And I was starting a business that made me think, okay, I want to be careful with how I spend my money. I'm not going to pay somebody to do something I can do, which is, again, a stupid entrepreneurial mistake, right? I found a web marketing team who could do something far better than I could because they actually wanted to do it. This was their sweet spot. This was what I have come to think of as something called joy strengths. Joy strengths are things that you love so much, you love doing so much, you're good at them. And you're so good at them, you love doing them, right? It's a perfect circle. And because people say, are you good at something because you love it, or do you love it because you're good at it? And the answer is yes. Both are true. So you figure this out and you get real joy doing it. And we all have things like that. We may not spend much of our life doing it. The classic entrepreneur is probably got into the business to do something that he really wanted to do. And then he's successful. And then he's become essentially management overhead in his own company. He's doing payroll, and he's doing this, and he's dealing with human resources issues and all kinds of other stuff, all of which is important, but it's not what he wanted to do. And what I'm proposing is once you figure this out, you need, and the way to do that is to figure out what do you want to do, right? What role do you want to play in your own business? And I think of this, you saw this in the book, as a casting decision, like you're casting a play or for a movie. You don't want to just delegate something to somebody because most people don't understand delegation. If you've been delegated to, the chances are you see it as just more crap rolling down the hill. My boss got it from his boss, got it from his boss, and it all gets dumped on me. And you hate it as much as they hate it. That's not the way to go. What I'm talking about is, what if you could find somebody to take some of this work off your plate, some of this work that you don't like, but they like it. And the fascinating thing about this is there are people in the world who like doing what you don't like. I've tried to figure this one out too, and I think it's the law of large numbers. There are 8 billion people in the world, right? So the chances are pretty good that if you think of something you hate, oh man, I'm doing payroll or whatever it is, at this very moment, there's somebody in the world doing what you hate and loving it, right? There are probably lots of people. So if you can find the right who to do this role, again, casting thing, to take this role and be the right person cast in the role. And we've all seen movies where there's the wrong person cast, and we've all seen movies where it's the right cast. And man, this thing works. If you find the right person for that role, you've just taken all this stuff off your plate and put it on their plate, and they're delighted. So you win, they win, and together the two of you have a much greater capability, much greater than just the two of you working together. It's exponential. It grows much more than just the sum of its parts. Now that's two people. What if you add another thing? And so you start looking at how you spend your day as an entrepreneur, and you narrow down to, what do I really love to do? What are my joy strengths? And then you imagine, what if I could spend my entire day doing that? Now, what comes out of that is this idea that you realize I can do more for my business doing that stuff than I can anything else. Because this stuff that you don't really like to do, that you've gotten trapped into doing, you're not doing a great job at it. You might be competent at it, but you're not passionate about it. You're not excited about it. So give it to somebody who's excited about it. Give it to somebody who's passionate about it. And you get to focus on what you're good at and what you love so much that you're good at it, what you're so good at, you love so much. That's this circular thing of joy strengths. So that's the power of you, the joy strengths, and the joy strengths of the people you delegate to or transfer work to, who work for you or work with you, to use whatever terminology you want. It's their joy strengths too. That's the power of who. So the power of who is casting the right cast member to help you realize your 10x vision. Because you got this spectacular vision of an impossible goal, and you suddenly realize, I can't do this alone. I can't. But if I start adding the right who's, there's no limit. It's not impossible anymore. That's the thing. You talk about when the light bulb goes off. When you start adding the right who's, you realize I'm not limited anymore. Not by my time, not by my effort, not by how much work I can put in, not by how many days there are in the week. There are no limits anymore because there are so many people I can tap to give them something they love and take it off my plate so I can do what I love. This is powerful stuff. It's mind-blowing stuff.
Absolutely. When we start a business, I always say we're a genius with 1,000 hands. Every single thing ourselves, sure, helps us get started. But like you put out, we are then a roadblock ourselves because we have limited energy. There's limited time in the hours. And after a certain point, that's the transition, what you just mentioned, that needs to happen. And
Yes.
I love it how you beautifully put it as casting, just like casting for a movie. It puts such a different spin on the hiring process. Because sometimes when you're not looking at it like how you put it as casting for a movie and you're just hiring somebody, your tendency might be to just hire the cheapest person.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you're thinking about in the movie, like you put it, you no longer are thinking about the cheapest actor. You're looking about the actor that will do justice to the role and therefore the movie. I love it. What are some quick things that entrepreneurs are listening to who are like, okay, I finally get it. I need to go out and find people who are truly wanting to do this for me and want it to be their joy strength. Is there any other tip that you have that you could say, hey, when you're looking to cast this person in your company, here are some other things to look out for?
Yeah, the first thing is it's based on what we've just been talking about. First, get some sense of what your joy strengths are. That's where it really starts. It sounds strange to say this, but the power of who begins with you. Figure out the power of you, the joy strengths, what you want to do, what role you want to play in your own movie. This is your movie. You can play any role you want. And I'm not talking about just being the boss. Anybody can be the boss. Anybody can bark orders. That's not it. I'm talking about you're making a movie, you want it to work in a certain way, and the movie now is not limited by some 20% growth. The movie is 10 times, right? So this is a big, major motion picture you're putting together, and you get to be whatever role you want. So figure that out. Then you start looking for cast members. And with that in mind, you start thinking, okay, so I've got these things I'm going to do. Here's all these other things that need to be done, right? In a movie, it's audio, it's cinematography, it's editing, it's the grips, it's the costumes, it's set making, all that stuff. Businesses, entrepreneurs run are just as complicated or more complicated. So there's all this stuff that you know needs to get done. Who is the right person to do this stuff? And you break it down, you compartmentalize it, right? So there's and none of this is new. People do this all the time. There's financial, there's marketing, there's fulfillment, these kinds of things. But instead of thinking, okay, I just hire somebody, lowest possible dollar, get somebody to show up for work, you are looking for somebody who's as excited about doing that as you are about doing what you're doing. And this is the thing that entrepreneurs who learn this have the biggest challenge with, because it's so hard to believe. If you take something you really don't like doing, it's so hard to believe that somebody else really would love doing it. So you don't really look for them. You put out an ad, and if they respond, you figure, okay, they're willing to do it. Yeah, I get that. They're willing to do it, but you want more than that, right? So you're interviewing, or whoever you have doing the interviewing, because you can have a who for that too, right? You can have a who to grow your company. You're just doing the stuff you love. If it happens to be interviewing talent, great. If it's not, you find a who for that. But once you have in your mind that you're looking for that, to cast that role, then you can open yourself up to the idea that there actually might be somebody who wants to do this role. What do they say? There are no small parts, there are only small actors. It's true in any job. That people who, I think of it as people who show up in character, right? You think of somebody coming to work in X job, fulfillment, getting boxes out the door, whatever that job is, however you describe it. And they show up in character ready to do that, looking forward to doing it. They can't wait to do it because that's what they love doing. Maybe they love the organization. Maybe they love the precision. Maybe they love to see a big pile of stuff that is gone at the end of the day. It doesn't matter why they love it. They love it. All it matters is that you find that person who loves it, rather than turning to the guy next to you and say, you're now fulfillment. I hate doing that stuff. I don't care. Right? That's the way most business works. And that's one of the reasons it doesn't work more than at incremental levels.
No, 100% right. And I've read about this, about Steve Jobs as well. But part of the reason why he was able to build such a successful company in such a short time is because he was great at hiring people. And although he's not around anymore and we can't ask him, I bet unknowingly he might have used some of the principles that you have used.
Oh, yeah.
So I love it. The book comes out very soon. It comes with a 10X Superpower coaching program. Tell us a little bit about that.
All right. So first, the bad news. Bad news is the book costs $10,000.
Yes.
And there's a reason for that. After people get over that, the sticker shock, it's a book. Nobody's ever paid $10,000 for a book. And the interesting thing is we've all read books that were worth $10,000 to us. We just didn't pay that much for them, right? What I'm doing is essentially saying, and this is the test part, I'm essentially saying if you're serious about learning something that can take your life, your business, your life to a level 10x beyond where you are now, and I'm being literal in this, if you're serious about that, then 10 grand is noise, right? If you think I'm worth more than 10 grand, you pass the test, we go on to the next thing. But if you say that's crazy, I'm not going to pay 10 grand for a book, the book isn't going to do you any good at any price. If I gave it to you, it wouldn't do you any good because your mind's not there. You're not in the mode of, I want this improvement. I will do whatever I need to because I'm worth it. And the book, the $10,000, comes with a money-back guarantee. If it's not worth, actually $100,000 is the guarantee. If it's not worth 10 times what you pay for it, I'll give you your money back. But if you're worried about that, you're not in the right place. It's back to this 1 in 100, right? We all know people, you don't have to tell names here. We all know people who read self-help books and self-improvement books and all kinds of success books. They've read tons of them, right? And it's like candy to them. And they read it, enjoy it. It's a wonderful thing. But I take this stuff seriously. If I read a book and I don't deploy it in my life, then why did I read it? What's the point? Really what I'm doing is up front, and instead of what a lot of people, I'm in the coaching business. I call it the superpower coaching business because I'm coaching people how to use the 10x superpower. Most of the people in this business will say, okay, here's a free book or here's a $20 book or whatever, and then try to sell you an expensive coaching program on the back end. I'm just turning that on its ear. It's just, you save time, I save time simply by saying, look, it's 10 grand. Are you in or are you out? Is this promise big enough for you or not? And if it's not, no problems. Nobody's offended. I get it. We already know that 99 people out of 100 that hear this are going to say, nah, that's not for me. That's the piece. Now, the good news, that's the bad news, the 10 grand up front. The good news is you get my coaching program with it for free. You get this really incredible one-on-one experience where I'm working with you as an individual. You get a certain number of coaching calls over a period of time, one-on-one. We also have group coaching calls. We also have workshops, and workshops are deep dives. They're full-day activities where you do a deep dive into something. You do exercises. You meet other people in the community. You network with people who are also working toward 10x goals. And that's an incredible mindset, an incredible community of people, like-minded people. So that's all included for free. Now, it's not for free. You pay 10 grand for the book. But I'm just saying, yeah, you get the book for this much, but you get the rest of this for free. And the point of all that is, as much as I want this to be true, it's not true. The book isn't going to make this happen in a person's life. I would love that to be the case. It's not. But if we work together in this coaching program, I can help you make this come to life in your life. That's why I do these things this way. That's why I do it together like this.
Makes complete sense. A tool is only as useful as the person who's willing to yield the tool and use the tool.
Yep.
So having the book itself, like you said, so many of us buy books and we sometimes don't even read them or in the shelf or casually browse through them. And you get a fake sense of an accomplishment because you read a book, but you never really did anything with it. You're turning that on its head and really holding people accountable. And I'm making them ask the hard question as to, do I really want this? And if I do, am I willing to commit to this?
Yes, exactly.
Keith, through the podcast, I always say I'm trying to help myself 10 years in the past. And the
I love
content of the book, the conversation with you, getting to know you a little bit, reading the excerpt of the book. I wish I had this book 10 years ago. All the trials and tribulations I went through and the sufferings I went through, I learned lessons from them and I'm grateful for all of them. But I would have much rather not gone through all that and be able to reduce the amount of time frame in which it took me to accomplish all of those things.
Yep.
You are a gift to us. I highly encourage people to connect with you, buy your book, join your coaching program. I truly cannot wait to talk to you again. Thank you so much for appearing on the show.
Mark, thank you so much. This has been delightful.